I want to thank Thom for agreeing to take the time out of it, to make the time for this keynote presentation. The theme of our conference, I was telling Thom, is old school, new school. And when we were discussing the keynote with his office, we referred to the talk as Thom Mayne versus Thom Mayne. And I think you'll see how it fits into the theme as he progresses with the talk. Over the last few years, the School of Architecture at Woodbury University has been cultivating a friendship with Thom, and we were grateful. We gave him a Citizen of the Year award, I think, and that started it. And then he got involved. He was very supportive of our Julius Schulman Institute on Julius Schulman's 100th birthday. So it's great to have you here, Thom. So also, when you see Sabrina, thank her for all of her help in getting you here too. Thom Mayne received his B.Arch. I know he doesn't need an introduction, but I'm just going to do it anyway because it's fun. And Thom Mayne received his B.Arch from USC in 1969 and completed his graduate work at Harvard's GSD in 1978. He established Morphosis in 1971 with Livio Santini, James Stafford, Michael Brickler. Michael Rotundi joined the firm in 1975 and was working with Thom until 1992 when he left to establish Roto Architects. Through the years, Morphosis received over 25 PA awards, over 75 AIA awards. I've heard as many as 100. In 1999 was a pivotal year for Morphosis, marked by the completion of the Diamond Ranch High School. Thom said that the project moved him from being primarily a paper architect to an architect whose ideas and designs interact with the world outside of progressive architecture. He was in his mid-50s at this point and said, "This is the first time I produced a piece of work that I could believe in." This was the first project where the aesthetic act and the social act were singular. Do you remember saying that? I do. At this point, his practice went from jobs that were $500,000 to $200 million. He has numerous other prestigious awards, including the Chrysler Design Award for Excellence, the Maybeck Award from the California Council of the AIA, and the Edward McDowell Medal. In 2005, as you know, Thom Mayne was the recipient of the Pritzker Architecture Prize, the only American to win the award in 18 years. Throughout his career, Thom has been active in academia. He was one of the founders of SciArc, right down the street. In 1972, with Ray Cappy, he's held teaching positions at Columbia, Yale, Harvard, the Berlage Institute in the Netherlands, and the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. He currently is a tenured member of the faculty at UCLA School of Arts and Architecture. He taught several generations of young architects to draw. When he was younger and winning PA awards right and left, there were years it seemed like all of the PA awards went to Morphosis. He was maybe a bit frustrated by the difficulty of getting things built, other than a few residential projects and some restaurants. He had spent his life standing up to the naysayers that constantly said, "It can't be done." He developed quite a reputation and was called numerous things: the bad boy of LA architecture, or the rowdy prince of paper architecture, or the maverick who hates playing by the rules. U.S. District Judge Michael Hogan, the point man for the federal courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, that Morphosis completed in 2005, had not met anyone like Thom Mayne in his life. Judge Hogan was not initially pleased with the selection of Morphosis as architect for the project. Hogan, an evangelical Christian, says one of the first meetings with Thom Mayne did not go well. Thom said that he was a loyal proponent of an extreme opposition to everything the judge believed in, adding that anyone with faith is not sane. But I like it. So anyway, it wasn't long, however, before the Judge Hogan was Thom Mayne's chief defender of courts. He said many times I would be working hard as I could to understand the building and the ideas, and I would come to some emotional peace, and then he would come back a week later and things were all turned completely upside down again. Fewer people outside his immediate circle hear about the other side of Thom Mayne, though, about his generosity of spirit. I'm told he is great to work with. Chris Genick, who we heard earlier today, of the successful firm Daly Genick and now Chris Genick Architects, he was the former undergrad director at SciArc and now dean at the New School of Architecture, or was dean at the New School of Architecture, calls Thom Mayne an amazingly wonderful person. That's nice. I owe my success to him, Chris told me about a year ago at dinner. Many younger architects will say the same thing about him. Former partner Michael Rotundi says in retrospect of Thom, he was a gift in my life, and now many others know what I have known for a very long time. Thom Mayne has a big heart. He's taken the bullet for many of us over the years. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Thom Mayne, one of the most important architects of our time.
I forgot, is this on? You gave me a good citizenship award? Oh my goodness. It shows where you guys are. Wow, it's funny, I'm gonna have to reverse some of the things I'm saying. You know, I was, by the way, I didn't do anything inside this building, so don't blame me for the space. It couldn't be a more horrendous space. And we built this building for $150 a square foot. So, and I'm gonna get to that a little bit, because it does connect to the academic world. You know, it's interesting, several things you said, it's going to be the beginning of my talk, is that, oh, what happened? Wait a minute, wait, I got to change something here. Something's wrong. Huh. Computer's kind of funky. Okay. Architecture starts with questions. And I came out of a very interesting era in undergraduate when USC was changing from a very kind of esteemed school that had architects that everybody knew. Craig Elwood and Pierre Koenig and Soriano and Harwell Harris, and I could go on. And Ray Cappy was there as a quite young guy. And something was changing. And of course, it was the late 60s. My biggest concern was staying out of the Vietnamese War. My brother didn't make it. And there was a huge shift in the students' relationship to the academic world, which is obvious, right? And we were rightfully or unrightfully empowered in a way that was quite unusual. And we were somewhat aggressive, and we were, by the nature of the time, somehow the notion of resistance was deeply embedded. And I'm going to say that it begins with my notion of any artistic act. It starts with a certain level of resistance and autonomy. And I think when you're much younger, it's somewhat immature in some degrees. It's somewhat more simplistic. But the various reputations that I've gotten with many of my colleagues had to do with a belief in that autonomy, especially within the particular capitalist system that we live in, et cetera, in terms of the location of values. By the way, architecture is value-laden, and that's one of the things I spend a huge amount of time talking to my students about, because it's quite unusual. I don't know if you agree. I find that unique to American practice, really, that architecture is somehow separated from values. You could never say that in Europe. Couldn't say that in Japan, most of the world. But there was an autonomy, there was an immediate resistance, and there was a notion of asking questions, and that's all you have to do to become a bad boy, right? To become annoying. And so tonight, I'm going to talk, by the way, not only did I not choose the space, I didn't choose the title. I got off a plane minutes ago. Shenzhen, China, and I looked at it. I looked at my assistant, Sabrina, and I go, "What's going on tonight?" And because I knew I was lecturing on the work, and I just was in Madrid lecturing on education, and there was no slides. It was talking about education. I assumed that I was going to rework that one. And he goes, "Oh no, you're talking about your work, and it's Thom Mayne versus Thom Mayne." I said, "Where'd that come from?" So I had nothing to do with that either. So, although I have to say, it's the old and new, or the new and the old. Or the new that's really still the old, whatever it is, maybe is going to be useful. And what I did do is I'm going to show 3 projects, and I'm going to show the trajectory, and they go 25, 30-year kind of spans, let's say, and I'm going to locate the topics and kind of how I work. I am an architect who teaches, without any question. I am not an academic. I've lived in the academic world my whole life. I started teaching 1 year before I started my practice, and then we started SciArc in '72. I started actually Morphosis in '72. And so that there's no question that there's an alignment, there's a connection which is indestructible in terms of my own history. And it's been at a very real level, and that my students and my workforce were simultaneous for the first 20 years, and they still are. When I go to the juries at SciArc, I go with a little pencil in hand. I show up at 7:30 in the morning when it's nice and quiet, and I survey the 80 projects for the thesis jury, and I'm taking notes, and I'm looking for certain types of people. And it's invaluable, the connection as an architect, to understand the available talent, which is completely essential to your workshop. Yeah? Before I start the discussion of these 3 projects, I want to just make a few comments in terms of my interests. I read in your thing today, there was somebody talking about manifesto. No such thing, completely disinterested in manifesto. Hey guys, Shad Woods and Bachema and Van Eyck at the end of CIAM were already taking apart the modernist project, and it was definitely being influenced by the existential guys, the Sartres, and the perceptual guys, the Husserls, and the Merleau-Ponty's, and it was moving to the specific, and if you listen to Bachema, the spiritual, Van Eyck, the specific, and with that, it was the kind of disappearance of any form of a zeitgeist or a singular kind of notion of manifesto. So definitely interested in that. What I am interested in is something much more relaxed, and that I think for myself, architecture operates on multiple platforms. Deleuze's, right, whatever, the 1,000. It's polycentric in its methodology, right? And it's challenging any singularity in terms of totality. That it always deals with multiplicity. And I'm probably not going to find too many people disagreeing with me, because it operates within aesthetic terms, it operates within urban terms, within landscape terms and ecological terms, it operates socially, culturally, economic, within political terms, et cetera, et cetera. And as you become more adept at and more skilled, you're able to expand the numbers of the interests you can deal with within your work, which is always a reflection of the world. You're doing nothing but somehow concretizing the nature of that world around you. And then, of course, today, and we've understood this, I think, since, say, the exhaustion of modernism, which is, but again, probably in the 60s when I showed up, there's no singular idea of what architecture is or isn't, right? And it's, I have to say, I don't know, your sense about it, it makes our task as educators, I think, extremely difficult. And that if I was going to talk directly about education, I would say that we need to find more commonalities and connective glue. And I always use Yale. Anybody from Yale, before I insult you? I use Yale as an example just because it's so kind of extreme. And I have 2 Yale kids in my New York studio and in my Paris studio. And you have Creer, and then you have Peter Eisman, and then you have Stern, and then you have Frank Gehry, and then you have another conservative one, even more conservative than the first 2, and then you have, who did I miss? Greg Lynn. You receive these completely intellectually schizophrenic characters, and at 19 to 23, It's very, very difficult to kind of sort those things out. And it's interesting, and it's not unusual. It's what all the schools are, and it's just about impossible. You can tell me otherwise. I see very, very few institutions that can somehow produce some singularity. And okay, I just said it's not a singularity, but some connective glue to various ideas, some agreements, and it would go back to any architecture which is based on some sort of value relationships, right? Or has some commitment to some political kind of idea, et cetera, and I think it'd be extremely important. I spent probably the first 15, 20 years of my life in a pursuit of, like many young architects and teachers, it was language driven, and I was interested in organizational ideas, and I was interested in defining the terms of a language or the definition of a language which came out of a process. I've never been interested in a priori formal language. Again, that was Louis Kahn in my case, and it was complete disinterest to me, anything that was a priori. And again, I came out of a period that was hugely process-driven, again, out of my own education, with Ralph Knowles. Anybody know Ralph Knowles? Exceptional teacher. One of these characters that isn't known very often, and just an amazing, he's still with me. In fact, I have a book I just put out, Combinatory Urbanism, and I dedicated it to him. And I was joking that at 67, it's kind of nice to look back at when I was 21 or 22 years old, and this is a guy that really, I'm still working with certain ideas. And then talking about that, I've been interested in a series, I've been preoccupied with a series of interests which have produced the work and produced the focus of my teaching. And it starts with differentiation and an idea of organization, which today, it started within a more abstract way, and it's moved towards a discussion that would be biology. I've been interested in the specificity of context from the get-go, and it had very much to do with my situation in Los Angeles. And it's, I think with myself, with me, it started with a very conservative position, not being comfortable. I come from Chicago. Not being comfortable in LA, and I was a Norberg Schultz guy, and I was a Ken Frampton guy, and then kind of worked my way out of that quite a while ago, and I started realizing that position was pretty much not reliable, and that we no longer live within the physical terms of our environment, much less history in the nature of the reality of the world. But in fact, that the site is mental, and that it's closer to intensification of activity, and it's simultaneous. And again, today, all of us live in a simultaneous world where we're instantly in 3 or 4 places at once, at 40,000 feet up in the air, whatever it is, right? And it completely kind of shifts kind of a notion of the relationship of place. And then early on, I got interested in landscape, or let's say ground, and that came directly from Raymond Abraham, and a show he did at Leo Castelli in the late 60s, and then right after that it was Michael Heiser, and I went out to see Double Negative, and that completely changed my life. I was a James Sterling guy, and it's an additive building. It's a Victorian additive process of making things. And of course, Michael was scraping and removing things, and it was just startling. And my architecture changed, and my teaching changed after that point. And then finally, the tectonic and material world. And it began more within a perceptual framework, and one that expanded the notion of the senses of architecture. There's been a huge confusion about how we understand architecture photographically, because a photograph has absolutely nothing to do with a piece of work. Absolutely, there's nothing that it has to do with the broader sensory experiences of the work. And I spent the first 10 years very much engaged at that level in the material nature of the work, and an attempt at a authenticity, which also kind of went away with the notion of a conventional site over the years that'll become evident. And well, it is and it isn't, I have to say. Okay, I'm going to go through extremely quickly. There's no interest in explaining the work in terms of what it is or how it works. I'm not doing that. I'm going to take just particular ideas and move you through that. And I think we have 15 to 20 minutes to chat. That, for me, that's the part that's I'm talking to myself otherwise, and the part I enjoy is the part at the end. And so there'll be 3 projects, and they vary a bit. The first one is going to focus on constraints, and again, these are going to be very connected to educational models or kind of conversations of the types of problems that we look at with our students. The second one is the Far Tower, a project that's just started construction in Paris, and it's based on performance and an idea towards context, a very particular urban idea. And the third one is Giant. It's a campus for a pharmaceutical company, and it deals with organizational ideas and the notion of land building hybrid of landscape. Cooper is a building about constraints. It was a zoning envelope and a program, and from the get-go, it was about that. And I'm going to show kind of things that led up to that. You mentioned Eugene. I'm going to have to immediately kind of move a little bit. If you don't have any sense of, if your students, I'm going to try to constantly redirect this back to the student. If you don't have any sense of who you are and what you stand for, in my opinion, you have huge problems practicing as an architect, and I would say that our profession suffers horribly from that we're not a strong profession, and we don't stand up for much of anything, and everybody knows that. If you look at the world, and we lose respect, and I hate that. I absolutely detest being connected to a group of people that are not willing to fight for their ideas, and that's where some of the reputation comes from. I'm going to fight to the end for something I believe in. And so we show up and we win this competition, and a lovely guy, I started talking about Che Guevara is my hero, of course, and just pushing it to the limit, and I'm doing it rhetorically, and I'm playing. I really love pushback, and I like playing with people that way, and it was done with huge amount of humor. I don't challenge people's religion, et cetera, that's their business, not my business. He literally wanted me to build this. And he says, oh, we got to go look at Cass Gilbert. And I go, well, Cass Gilbert, you realize that's a steel constructed building, right, with modern infrastructure, et cetera, and of course he didn't. But he's just operating off of a radical overestimation of history as a device, and of course he's a lawyer by training, so jurisprudence is precedent. Precedent is our term of history, right? And so he's always looking backward, and he literally, it's really interesting because we spent many years together, how different architecture education is. We are exploring, even, and it doesn't matter how conservative or radical the schools are, you're always moving. There's a forward trajectory somehow. And in law, there is no forward trajectory. It's only a reverse trajectory, right? Because it's all based on what has been and maintaining that. And the other one comes out of some personal desire for making contemporary or adjusting that, right? And so we went through huge numbers of studies and basically said, nice idea, but let's start again. And then took him through an education of the relationship of how one locates architecture organizationally and through a very abstract process. And we were using the Tao of fishing as an idea. He's a fisherman and blah, 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 and I was playing with him. And as you throw the line out, there's a random pattern, which is actually an example of chaos theory. And out of that, we drew these lines, and out of that came a skin. And well, we were doing all kinds of other stuff at the time, and we're making a point, because he was a person that I was not going to move forward without a clear rationale, an argument, right? And by this time, we were already kind of getting along, and it turned into kind of a very a plan that had to do with this lines of flow. And I should say, what was key here, and I had long talks with my students during this time, we were getting nowhere for a while, and then he was going to Moscow to lecture the courts, because he was a consultant. And he's the Chief Justice. He's one of the 50 Chief Justices in the United States. And I was on my way to Paris, and we met there, and I took him to Bordeaux to look at Richard Rogers, and I took him to Nantes to look at Jean Nouvel. It was the key thing that happened in our relationship. And he got it immediately. He's a very, very intelligent man. And it had nothing to do with the architecture. It had to do with the position of the architect. And we went first to see Richard Rogers. Okay, clearly a very tough, strong building that's about architecture, that's about Richard, right? His understanding of what architecture is or isn't. But we went to Nantes. It was fabulous because Nouvel he has a great sense of humor and autonomy, and he likes to fuck around with people. I have to say that directly. And he got it immediately. This is a guy, and he said it startled him that an architect would have that kind of power. Never occurred to him. We just put things together. He gives us the orders, right? Build that, right? With fake Doric columns or whatever you want to do, and they do it, right? And it was fabulous. Came back, totally changed the relationship. It got us to this. And I think these are stories that you have to bring back to the academy, because this is exactly what your young students are going to be doing in 2 or 3 and 10 and 20 and 30 years, right? Because they're going to be faced with these same issues, and they have to have some understanding of the various options to deal with these realities if you're going to pursue some notion of a serious architecture. And then with this came open-endedness. Spent a year talking about constitutional law, the interpretation. I went out and did just an insane amount of reading, and I tried to prove to him that all interpretation, it's only interpretive. Whether it's interpreted literally, there's no such thing as literal, because the English language has changed in 200 years, right? And we went through that because I was going to say it's open-ended, it's dynamic, and seems like he kind of bought into some of it because it is open-ended and it's quite dynamic, and it's not going to remind you of some courts. But at the same time, it's hugely rooted in the tradition of the court, the piano nobile, the stair, which is actually the length of the Supreme Court, the single-room courthouse, which is the history of the United States, and we made it so that you could see we invented a way to see out of all 4 sides, so it feels like a single building. And then when you look at the shape, it's a holding shape, and we spent a lot of time studying the jury box and the audience and the prosecution defense, and came up with a very new idea of kind of looking in and a quasi-separation of the jury. And then we bent the room to him and played all kinds of games that made him even more important, put a light over him, and then we put a guillotine. We cut the thing down the middle and separated. And by this time, we could laugh. And he got the joke, and we both agreed that the light, the division of it, would be read in multiple ways, in subtle ways, and we were together. Cahill, much, much tougher. Probably 90% of buildings, a box, right? And we're going to deform it, and we're going to use that deformation to attack. This is Cahill. This is astrophysics at Caltech. No budget, no project, just this little square building. And again, you're aggressively kind of finding kind of a location of architecture. Because again, our conversation has been starting for years of not accepting an a priori idea of an aesthetic. You're asking questions, what is the architect's role in this particular project, right? And we're breaking down this 300 foot corridor, and we're personalizing it. And as you cross, you're looking at campus, and you're getting these very specific views, and you're locating it in a broader urban campus setting, and you're personalizing it, and you're de-institutionalizing something that has, I think we had 4 Nobel clients in this building that expected that, and that saw their spaces in highly personal terms. And then locating a public space and using the force lines. Their work is as astrophysicists, has to do with the movement of atomic particles, and we use that as an idea to kind of break and sever both from the inside as it moved the corridors and produced these more idiosyncratic, much more personal spaces, and as it broke the exterior of the Cartesian box and the simplicity of that. And then at the same time, we used it as an invention for producing a very unique public space. And now here we are again. This could be a student project, and we're asking our class the location of architecture. How does one locate find the essence of a creative act, and how does one locate that? And as architects, that's all we're interested in, because we repeat it, and we have to understand where it comes from. We have to locate it. And teaching, of course, is useful because you can't operate totally within intuitive, nonverbal terms, that you have to be able to articulate those ideas. And all of my work from the beginning has been with a teamwork. I do not work by myself. None of this I can take credit for. Everything I do is connected to various people in my studio, and it's absolutely embedded in that process. And I was mentioning earlier that I'm finding, again, I'm not sure what you're saying, in the last 4 or 5 years, I'm finding a group of students that are really quite different. They're interested in collaborative work, and they see a little less me because I work within a team, but still, the signature architecture, what do you want to call it, is kind of old school, and that they're much more interested in broader urban infrastructural problems. And I found a noticeable difference, and they want to work in teamwork. And so that we get to Cooper, and here we go again. It's a box, and it's filled with program, and the program is a given. And so we've got that, and it's a zoning envelope. And again, we're asking, well, what's our role in this project? Because we were asked to produce kind of very literally an icon, which is kind of spooky, because that's a description of a final product. And they also wanted something quite idiosyncratic. It's a school I was very, very familiar with. Haydick was a huge influence on me, and it was a huge influence on the school. Jim Stafford and I basically thought we were modeling SCI-Arc after Cooper Union and the AA, with a little bit of Angewandte involved. And so here we go. Well, actually, it's the social space, it's the connective glue, it's a vertical piazza, and of course, in Cooper, and it's all the stuff that connects to that. And of course, Cooper, is uniqueness is its relationship to art, engineering, and architecture. And it's not quite that simple, that in reality, there's usually different synaptic stuff going on with the three groups, and there's a tendency to balkanize. And everything in this project had to do with the social pedagogical approach, and was advancing relationships, connections, transparency, et cetera, et cetera. And so then now when you look at the building, the space you see is the public space, and we suppressed everything else with the skin, both for environmental and for the documentation of the public spaces that brings the creative intellectual capital to the street, which is nothing more than Los Angeles. And then, like this building, we had to be very, very frugal, or we had to be very specific in where we're going to locate the architectural events. Again, a building of very, very low budget, and which is kind of strange because most people think it's a building of high budget. I'm constantly have to remind people that, you know, Shijima down the street, same builder. It was 1,000 a foot. This is 600, and it's loaded with chemical labs and all that kind of stuff. And we go to work, and well, it's all, again, by this time, this is 4 years ago, we're working now on more and more platforms, and it's the first platinum building in New York. And again, I can choose to talk about it in any number of ways. And the formal might be the last. And then the inside is about flows. And so the first diagram of the space, which is figurative and locatable, and it becomes the primary kind of connective glue to the building, and becomes the architecture really, or something that's memorable and unique to the space. And we did huge studies. There was a person in my office who spent over a year just working on this. And again, we work reiteratively, and again, that's directly connected to my teaching. When we work through reiteration and through a dialogue, which has to do with an interrogation, let's say, of the project. You challenge it, ask questions of it, move it forward. Same again, move it forward, right? Or you think it's moving forward, and in fact something takes place. You keep asking questions, and you have to veer the other way, and it's extremely important. And then today again, Marvin, I think we were just before we came in. I think there's you maybe have touched on a lot of these today. I haven't been with you. I think the education of architects today is a really, really interesting subject. And I think it's in play, and it's ripe for some really significant shifts in how we educate students, and probably a need for specialization versus the generalist, or at least all generalists. I have an office that's probably 1/3 what I would have had 15 years ago. And I have 60 people, meaning I would have had 180 people, easy. The machine, I have 3 of them, Z-Corps, and another one in New York, I have 4 of them, that make these, and they're working right now. Somebody's going to turn it on at 10 o'clock, and we'll dust it off at 6 in the morning, and I'll be looking at it, drawing on it, we'll be talking about it at 8 or 9 in the morning, and you're moving at the speed of light. And what's also taking place, which I think is extremely fascinating, and I'm having a real struggle with students. We don't put students that have any knowledge of any idea of construction or any reality, none. And I actually bring in Eastern Europeans for my site supervisor guys, and I don't even try. I haven't got 10 years to train them. I just find them some other culture. Or I bring them from big offices that have already trained them, and they've gone through the 15 years. What's happening now is that from the very get-go, they're building. When we're making that, it's no longer an abstract model. That is the thing we're making. So when I ask what it is, it's materially something. It's not white stuff that's lines of ribbon. It actually has material characteristics, but there's no way to model it and to dimension it and to give it the specific it has, right? And then what's happening also is this is happening way, way up front. There's no longer any such thing as schematic 2D working drawings. You're working at different scales simultaneously, and it's really interesting because most brains operate that way. You're working on something, and something happens, and it's at a micro, tertiary level, and something else comes up, and it's another one. Another's a broad idea, and I think it's the way most people's brains operate as you rattle through different ideas, right? And it's exactly what's taking place in architecture today. So this is at the end of schematics, and we're also, of course, in an office. Students don't have to do this yet. We have to keep up with a cost model. Otherwise, it's just going to go away. And so I'm protecting my client's interests and my interests, and I have to do that. Otherwise, I'm just wasting my time because, again, I know that I have to do this very simply. And I had a young woman that I'd brought back with me from the Bartlett that did this. And finally, she's doing this, and we figured out how to make it out of 2 curved pieces and 1 straight piece, right? Because it had to be simplified because we had to make it very inexpensively, and it turned into this. And the contractor actually made money on it. When I walk on the site, I always ask them, are you doing okay? I learned years ago that you got to take care of your builders. And I'm walking with my staff, and we're all having this conversation. Well, she's 2 years out of school, and you have to work this way because we're making buildings. We're not making drawings. But what's interesting, you're not making drawings anymore. More and more, you're making the building. So from the get-go, you're constructing and designing. Really, really interesting, right? For me, it takes me back my little house era when I was in my late 20s and building these little houses. I was building stuff. And we from the very beginning, I was in welders' offices, and I had all this little cottage industries working for me. And but we would be in there ourselves, working away, close the office. They literally do some of the construction. And it was hugely important as a beginning, for me anyway, for starting architecture, because it got me really engaged in the reality of the work. And today, we have these kind of options. And you can operate, so we can look at it, we're looking up in the space, and it's the stairways, which are now also operating on a digital level that would have been unimaginable even 10 years ago. The abstract aesthetic act and the technological act are connected from very, very early on. And if you see this building and you look at, I don't have a pointer, the stair is coming right out of the grid, and the geometries are just incredibly complicated. And they're more or less free today with the, oh dear. Oh, I'm struggling. Oh dear, I bet I lost my timer. Oh, I had everything so worked out here. My little timer's going. Oh, it started at 0 again. So it's going to go about an hour and a half now. Are we up there? Okay. What can I do with this guy? This I don't know where the screw doesn't work, where this guy is. I can't get this tied in here. Anyway, so here we are. And okay, second project, Far Tower. By the way, I have, my average age in my office is probably 27, 28 years old. So like, yeah, a lot of you, they're just out of school. They probably average 5, 6 years out of school, right? And I take just about all people fresh, not counting those few people that are on a site that have to be able to scream to a contractor and know what they're talking about and have experience. I like to train my own people. I don't like to take them from anyplace else. And a huge amount of them, of course, from my own students or people that I've met in the academic world. And we won a competition 3 years ago, very big building, biggest building in Paris. And we're modeling it as always, and the models are getting a little larger. And this is going to be about some sort of mixture of an urbanistic idea and performance. And well, again, you were asking me to track stuff way back. 1982, we're doing a house, and it's already not seen as a house. It's seen as a village clutter, and it's interested in the relationships of things, not objects. And I've been working on that for my whole life, and I'm fascinated in the collaboration of the conversation, the dialogue that's produced in architecture about relationships. And so a few years later, we're invited to Berlin for the American Gedenkbibliothek. And again, it's a building, it's a library, and it's seen as a collaboration of a series of elements which are all making various interpretations of the site, both literal and historic. The first bar, that's part of the 10% of the old building that's left, the axis on Friedrichstrasse, and the various elements, all having to do with the collaboration of a greater site. And then immediately from the beginning, these notions of singular buildings turned into multiplicities, as buildings always responded to site conditions having to do with scale and having to do with interpretations of various site opportunities. The Toronto, again, gateway, directly part of a program, a part of the main boulevard, a part of a threshold of the campus, and it came directly from the competition brief. And that's urban, and it's going to be about the relationships of parts urbanistically that are accommodatory. And then the idea of performance was fascinating. Again, I was just out of undergraduate school, just formed more of a sister, Jim Stafford, and Jim and I worked on this school called Sequoia. And it was about a building that changed form in response to sun condition and environmental response. And at the same time, it had a surface. And I was instantly involved in Jean Prouvé, and we were interested in the mechanics and the dynamicism of that versus the brise-soleil of Corbusier. And then years later, this is probably 15 years ago, we got this piece of work in Seoul, and we got involved in skin as a more abstract idea, and it was a fashion house, and it was going to have to do with a kind of a dynamicism of a building, and it was an absolutely kind of speculative project. And again, we were starting to ask our questions when we came back from the first site visit of what are we even going to do? It's a kind of one of these typical, the elevator core, the depth, the zoning envelope, and we were quite kind of depressed about it. And we said, well, what we're going to do is we're just going to do the skin, and we're going to find a dialogue between skin body, and the body goes away, and the skin's going to stay. And we found a way of where we're now rationalizing it. The computer had just entered the office, and so there's a huge shift going on. At that point, we were using origami as a method of folding, which was, again, just part of our tradition. And we were beginning to understand how to translate it into reality. And we were shifting, although I missed the 2468, because that was the first time we actually located the parts. We didn't do any drawings, which was prophetic of exactly how we work today. And then here we are drawing, building, and the finished product, and again, skin, body, and finally the skin started affecting the body, and in fact did change the piece of work. And then the material qualities are changing. And again, huge shift. I grew up drawing. I learned architecture within the traditional method, and we're now moving into a world with a digital environment that's somehow parallel to the types of materials we use. Translucencies, transparencies, et cetera, right? Which makes sense totally in terms of how we build, and the language turned to the inside. And then we showed up in Austria, and it was parallel to the school. It was our first big kind of a major building in our career, and the Hoopa Bank. And now the skins were becoming performative And what happened is completely unaware of the difference in the demands environmentally in a European situation than this country. And so the normal code requirements, openable windows, minimum depths, second skins, and we were adapting to a very different, more stringent notion of how buildings behave. As you know, Europeans, last I read, use just about exactly 1/2 the energy per capita of the States, right? And so it's a huge, huge difference in the architectural world. And then this started taking place. We're now using multiple types of skins that had to do with a parallel of an idea of an urban construct, et cetera, and the definition of these pieces. And we became fascinated in the qualities, the huge dynamicism that takes place over a day. So I took this photograph, and 3 seconds later, it's a complete different thing. As the sun's moving, it's constantly moving. You're seeing simultaneously 3 layers of things, and we took off with that. And then parallel to that was the quality of the material was producing transparencies which were parallel to the social demands of the workforce, right? And was very much a part of that. So we come back to the States, here we are, and now we're dealing at building 100% performance. We won it on the notion of the court. We're the only people that produced an open space, which nobody was interested in the beginning, and we produced this double skin, and the skin is operating within graphic terms, within aesthetic terms, within performance terms, and of course we have a building that's facing west and east, and we produce something that at a very, very high level, and then the south we're using a brise-soleil, a photovoltaic, and then we get to San Francisco, but this one, the shapes are given, cost, parameters, right? So we already knew, we'd been in Klagenfurt, that the major shift taking place today is not the skin, it's volume, right? That's the reason Leeds is, you know that Leeds doesn't calculate volume? It completely erodes the whole meaning of Leeds. The good news is they can make it happen, and you wouldn't do it if you're forced to really do the solution. The solution is the shape of the building, right? To get wind to come through it, it has to be 17 meters wide, and that's it, right? And they don't even give you a credit for that. And so we come along, the next building, just about simultaneous, we won the competition in San Francisco. And there we had this extraordinary client that was Ed Feiner, heading GSA, was behind it. And he was very interested in us. We were the kind of the next young generation, et cetera. And it was just an extraordinary opportunity. And we convinced him to leave a huge amount of open space and build this narrow building, which allowed us very early, we had conversations with OVERUP and with Lawrence Berkeley Labs, and whether we could actually take the air conditioning out. And we pursued that idea and produced this narrow building. And now it also has social spaces, West Pocket Park, San Francisco on the 11th floor, and a daycare center on the lower floor, not a gallery or not a formal space, but a daycare center. 55% of the workforce are women. And then here's this West Pocket Park, and it's an open park. There's weddings and et cetera in there, and then a very formal kind of entry, which is part of the federal thing. And we took the air conditioning out. The skin equals the air conditioning. And we have 2 different kind of skins, the south-facing, which is operable and takes out a huge amount of heat, and the north-facing, which is guiding wind through and taking extreme light of incident light of morning, evening. And it gave us this kind of very unique opportunity of this thick skin. And at the same time, we built in catwalks for window cleaning, and because we got in this country again, unlike Europe, in the Hoopa Bank, we could amortize the cost. And the conversation was, is it 7 years or 9 years amortization? And we could put that cost in the building. Here, no conversation. This is built during the Bush era. I was really proud of it. We got nothing. So we had to do this on a set budget. We built this for $270 a square foot. And ended up being just an incredibly interesting project. Okay, the part I missed here is that when we won the project, we hadn't even made our first visit to San Francisco, and there were newspaper articles, John King, I think, saying radical LA architect, radical firm coming up to San Francisco to muck up our town. And John Enright, the guy I was working with, who's now the head of you here, John? The head of the undergrad program at SARC, sat down, and we realized that we had to really rethink how we approached the work. And it was the first time that we moved into a strategic kind of method of working, and we decided that we would never discuss aesthetics. it was going to be the urban response, it was going to be the workplace, and it was going to be an environmental response. And we knew there'd be an absolute alignment in terms of what we were looking for in the San Francisco community, and it was actually incredibly successful because it moved the discussion out of the aesthetics. And again, I would think in an educational environment, it's really, really important that there's so much emphasis put on the aesthetic, the physiognomic, what do you want to call it, right? And it's just, first place, there's limited amount of people that are going to go in that direction, really. You're born with it, and you're not going to attain it. That simple, done. And it's not, you don't need so many of you. There's 110 schools, right? It just, you don't need so many, you need more people doing other things. And anyway, the one building powers 600 homes, and so 10 of these things would do a little town of 20,000 people. And then you get the far tower, and everything should be clear. This is the precedent, right? So here we are, and we have this edge of big building, 2 million square feet, 300 meters. We're at the edge of a lot of fonts on a non-site. And this is really interesting, because now we're in a position that couldn't be better for me. Literally, you're looking at the site, the stuff here, and then, well, there's even a space that goes through it, basically a 30-meter cube right in the middle of it, and that's going to be an alley through the University of Courbevoie, and that's what we're working with. And again, we go through this process of reiteration, of challenging, et cetera, et cetera. And here it is, and it's the far tower was actually the second place to the Eiffel Tower, and it was a single light. It was a light Paris, really hilarious. I don't know if they were smoking in '89, but it was pretty out there. And here we are, and we're a couple centimeters shorter, and that's by law. And again, it's a collaboration of buildings, and we're trying to restitch together a very famous site that's used as an example of horrific modernist planning. And then again, we're looking at a collaboration of buildings that, as you see it, going back to Korea, because again, in Korea, we were very interested in the dynamicism of the form. As you see it from different positions of the city, it's constantly transforming. And then its relationship to this odd site, which demands a movement system. There's 10,000 people move in this building within a little over an hour, and they're coming out of the lower part of the slide is the metro, the one line, and they're coming through the Keynote, Nervi's building, and then up into a pavilion, and up into this main space, across and over infrastructure. We're on top of also an RER, a metro, and a roadway. So it's just an absolutely fascinating kind of site that gave us this really, really unique opportunity to produce something, and then the vertical movement. And then here we are coming out of the Keynote on the complete right, up into a pavilion, up through the escalators. As you move up the escalators, you're at about 110 feet. You're looking down the Champs-Élysées, about 7 kilometers to Paris. And models of that space, kind of a highly complex triple layer skin that goes 20 stories high. And the space is still seen as the public, not the building. You're still part of the metro system, and you're still part of the essence of public space, right, versus private space. And we had an exceptional client. Again, here it is. And then here are the plans, the lower floor with the piece going through to the university. And then the first lobby, it's split in half because of the numbers of people. The second, the 27th level, which is a cafe and a deck of that small lower building, because the lower building forms the relationship to the rest of the context. And at this level, you're looking over the city. And then again, you're moving up, and every floor is different. And here you are at 100, 200, and 300 meters over Paris, and it's just a really kind of exceptional thing. And here we are with San Francisco, but now we bent it, and we're aligning the aesthetics of a softer form and the relationship of the screen is just moving east, south, west, and in terms of performance, and we're aligning that, and the top is left unfinished. Again, account for this building, whatever we're done, and it has wind farm, et cetera. This could be, and now here we are with the same conversation we were with Cooper, right? And that we can optimize the grid system and the structure and the facade, and we can put it in families. And this was already about 6 months old, and you can see by the lines we have a fairly large number of families, and we're going to take that down to probably 24 to be able to build it, right? And of course, today we're scripting, and that's a whole nother territory. I've got 3 people. I've got 2 people that have worked on this for 2 years, scripting, and what we get out of it is that. 5,500 individual pieces. And if you look at each one of these, that's a date, and it's going to tell you when it's most optimal. And we can design this facade for absolute optimal solar exposure. And then again, the skin. And like the other one I was showing you at Cooper, here is a piece of that triple skin structure, inner skin, glazed wall, catwalk, brise-soleil, sunscreen, right? And this is schematic. And we couldn't even pursue the project without keeping it in a cost model, right? And amazing, amazing process, because I've got this young people working on this, and we're not even finished schematic, and we have to understand the building at this level. But we're also simultaneously working at multiple scales, right? Which is just really fascinating. And then the lighting, there'll be an LED that kind of traces the, kind of a dynamic drawing of the thing. Okay, last project is the Giant, and it's going to be, this is going to be about, again, I'm going through these various territories. This is going to be about organizational ideas and landscape. And it's going to start with a competition, an exhibition, probably 20 years ago. And we had just got our first computer. And it was an exhibition in Copenhagen. And they wanted us to trace a 100-meter line across the city. And I took a photograph every a kilometer every 100 meters, and it was done spontaneously. The first object of the dire, I photographed it, and then we modeled it and put it together, and I built the hippocampus, which is short-term memory, and I built an idea of locating these elements in my brain. And what happened here is that we were just using the computer. We're working only in 3D. We were through with this, and what we figured out is that plan was over. There's no such thing. Planimetric is gone. It's history. Nothing left, right? And again, I spent a lot of time plan section, and that's how I learned how to make architecture. And the rigor of it had to do with that. And I brought in people for years out of Cornell and certain schools that had already an instinct for that rigor. And we're realizing that it's now a result. It's a CAT scan. You go back, and by the way, plan are equal. A vertical, horizontal, it's irrelevant. It's a CAT scan. And I can now take a plan of this. I didn't show it here. I can show them at whatever increment I want. I kind of crank it up, come in the morning, and I've got 70 drawings, whatever you want, right? It's absolutely an automatic process, but it's a result of the thing. And then with that came organizational ideas, which went directly back to an idea of multiple systems, each having their own authority, and it started a very particular idea of organizing space, which started with way early on with the village clutter and vaguely collage, let's say, and it's now moving into a very different kind of rigorous program, and out of that we can produce pieces that have kind of infinite diversity, and we're challenging ways of making coherency. We're interested in how do you make things coherent, and we're participating in that conversation. And then the second part, the land part, again, I'd mentioned Heiser, and 84, we were invited for the competition for the expo, and something just happened based on the site, and we started realizing that the ground and the building were more singular, and we were designing all of them programmatically, and we immediately figured out that the ground pieces could accommodate shopping centers, parking, infrastructure, on, right? And theater complexes, and it was the first kind of involvement in challenging figure ground, dynamic building, static ground, how you want to talk about it. And then right after that, the Arts Park, we were working with Group Himmel on this in Los Angeles. Really funny. It was a competition in the Valley. Completely, they never went in. We're still working, making projects. And by the way, and all your students, I'm probably already 40, never even really thought about being an architect in terms of building. These are our products. We're producing ideas, right? And a little house here and there, right? And maybe a little different at that time. You could kind of accept that. It seemed to be a little more difficult today. It'd be like starting a SIROC. No possible way would it happen at this point of history. And these kind of very, very kind of complex projects that came out of this notion of digging. And then the school, Diamond Ranch. And I had this unusual client. This was the first drawing I showed him. This was a schematic sketch. of what the schools look like, and it's just an augmented landscape, and then it goes through planning, and it looks like this. And then right after that, Chiba, and we're still working now with this idea of an augmented land. And again, the other aspect of Hoopa Bank was this augmented landscape. And this one, we challenged the whole zoning. We actually went back to the zoning and changed the zoning to figure the notion of the perception of this idea. And it was this perpetual open land was the idea. And then in Udon, again, for the same client, we're now mixing landscape, infrastructure, and building are seen as singular as an idea. And this is forming a new groundscape at multiple levels, which gives us a very, very different idea of organizing an urban site, which is part of an interior notion, all of which is this idea of the relationship between building and landscape. And then so we get to giant, it's obvious. Oh, I'm starting to work on the connection of what I'm going to talk about with Hadrian's, because I'm realizing there's a very direct link and I haven't got there yet. And so here we are, an organizational idea, the exact opposite of Cooper, which is absolutely constrained and limited. Now I need a system of organizing within a complete open possibility, and I'm looking at these multiple systems which interact to make a complex village. You're looking at something that's 400 yards, 400 meters long, and I'm now able to look at various components, and we're studying it, and we can see it. Oh dear. I can look at it, and I can constantly evaluate it, and I can change the terms of the things I'm looking at, and I've got this infinitely flexible system of kind of operating through an organization which operates on more a set of associations than a literal, How do I get out of this? You ever notice how you hook it up to a different projector and your thing acts differently? I'm going to have to take it out, I'm sorry. There we go. And then out of that comes the plan. And again, what I'm looking at is, the reason I'm looking at Hadrian's, I'm looking at something that borrows from the complexity of the city and has the capability of producing extremely organized but idiosyncratic found spaces, and it's a study of willfulness and chance, and this has become a whole kind of area of teaching that I've been involved with for probably 6 years. And again, something that's going to be between landscape and building, and something which is infinitely changing. There's no section that's equal. And I'm looking for something that's mimicked the city, and then an environmental strategy quite opposite. There's only 13% of the building is even building. Everything else is now in the ground. And then here we are again. I'm working in just outside of, in Pudong, outside of Shanghai, and we're modeling this piece. Here it is in the office, ditto, ditto. There it is, over 13,000 individual pieces, hardly any of them the same. We had 6 pieces that came back, right? Really amazing kind of process, right? But the skin came from, this comes from Beijing. The skin on the earlier ones, it comes from Switzerland, and they're all pre-cut. And again, this hugely kind of different opportunity. And so here we are, and we're allowed to do something within very different terms. And again, everything about this project is going to be about the connection of a landscape environment and a building, and looking for this hybridized situation and an integration between the farm and or the country and an urban environment, and seeing the conflictual status. Didn't choose to talk about that today. Literally everything I'm interested in is connected to some idea of conflict, of a series of non sequiturs. I don't know if anybody uses Kiesler. He's the art of creativity, because he talks about creativity being radically simplified, connecting dots. And the more dots you connect and the more seemingly non sequitur the dots, the higher level of creativity. And it just seems useful, and so I'm interested in that idea. And again, we were talking about earlier also, if you've ever read Seeing is Forgetting, the Robert Irwin piece, I find it absolutely the singular most important piece of reading for a student. The clearest notion of how he produced his work over 40 years is just amazing. And And so here we are. And it's, again, I'm not going to explain the project. Oh, that was a structural piece, done now, right? Right? So again, here we are. Right? The glazing, 6 different systems that are all coming together. And again, the interest in producing the kind of variety which includes the accidents and the mistakes that represent a city developed over time. Crossing the highway, you got to go to the other side of the site. One of the things that's extremely interesting working in China, I couldn't have done this. The client asked me what this piece is coming over the street, and I said, it's architecture. It's the connective tissue. That was enough. This is a $500,000 piece, all right? And I would have been thrown out of the room in this country. Funny, I came here in a horrible mood. When I arrived from China and arrived in this country, this put me in a literally lousy mood. And I just came from a client. Never once did we discuss program or dollars. It starts with perception. It starts about the sense of something. It'll get there. And it's really amazing. It's a completely, totally different way of talking about a project, the way it should be. Right? And he'll even remind me, because he knows I'm an American architect, don't get carried away with function. What I'm looking for is a sense of a project and the perception and the sensibility of the project as a human experience, right? And you go, I got a good one. And again, the wall was going to be valued, engineered out. That wall, to give an idea of the scale, at the very end, the tallest point, is 30 feet tall. And it's 150 meters long, right? And really, really different experience. And again, the surface is coming from Switzerland, and now again, the mechanics and the aesthetics are connected, and I'm able to produce something of huge, huge variety and complexity. And coordinate this kind of large complex having to do with the tools available to us today. I'm going to finish it up in a second. The recreation complex, the entry, hotel entry, and again, the coordination of these various pieces, they never touch each other the same way, right? They're always unique in their relationships. The corridor of the housing, as you're moving now to the very end of the complex, you're over the landscape, you're bridging over it, the water's coming under you, and you're connecting to the living quarters. And then there's this open space that is designed with the water elements, et cetera, that's part of the living complex. And then again, looking out of that at night. And then again, this building, which is hybridized, part landscape, part building, this thing between. Okay, I put, very quickly, 3 endings. Couldn't decide. So I gave you 3 of them. First one is going to be obvious. Drawings are a way of seeing, notations, right? And these are pieces of my notebooks. And these are completely subjective. I have no idea what they're about. I just free associate. Sometimes I borrow things. I'm in my world as a departure point. And I have many, many of these. And it's I'm just free-floating, and I'm allowing myself just to kind of expand whatever I'm interested in, and it's completely private. And then I've been interested in another set of drawings, which are kind of objects. They're kind of things, and they're highly material, and they're collective. I'm working with people making these things, and we talk about them, and we work together on them. And then recently, I've been working on a series of paintings, and I brought a kid back from Cornell, and they're the Far Tower. They're the Giant project, and I'm working on an idea where every one of these pieces is made out of 4 DNA elements, and they're the exact same elements. And I'm looking at the diversity of organizational type and the characteristics, the qualities of the environments these produce, and it's object, surface, vertical line, horizontal line, and they're identical. And I'm looking at the qualities of these, and they're a type of abstract architectural research, but they're literally the Giant project. And it's been really fascinating because I've been working with him kind of privately, personally, don't talk to the studio, and I really enjoy the stuff goes up and the people are kind of looking at it and going, what's going on, et cetera. But it's fascinating. It just shows up immediately, especially at the large scale work. You just everywhere you see it, and it's incredibly powerful. And again, this is about half of them. And the project will finally exhaust itself when I can produce no new matter, right? So it'll be self-exhausting and then we're now turning those into real drawings. These are three-dimensional drawings, and we're starting that, and then I'm starting to carve them into the wall, and then I kind of stopped. This is another project, or let's hold it for another 6 months, and we'll go back to this one, because this could be something else. That's one. And that's just a continuation of the last project I showed you. The next one is the more serious one, and I'm just going to say a few words about it, but it could be the whole talk. If one expands this notion of the radical shift in how we can handle large amounts of information through the digital environment and the interest in combinatory behavior. It started with me 7 years ago with a grant by Richard Kashalik. Really, really interesting. You, of course, know the whole story. He was teaching it. He was a director at MoCA. He was then the president of Art Center. Came to me and asked me if I would be interested in making provocations of work in Los Angeles, and he gave me a big handful of money, and we went to work on the first project called LA Now, and he was interested in working downtown, and without kind of knowing it, we weren't totally in alignment, and that I saw LA as a metropolitan problem, and so we went to work deciding what LA was, and it was fascinating because out of this came a complete different direction. I had now moved to UCLA, and it'd be a whole other discussion of how our institutions are different, and UCLA is a very, very different platform than Sawyer. And I recognized that, and I was looking at a shift in my own work and my own research, and it shifted from something that prioritizes aesthetics and one set of ideas, which it does very, very well as an institute, to a university, which is multiply disciplined and has huge, huge opportunities that are quite more expanded. And out of this came an extremely interesting set of conditions with my students, because now I was working, and the whole class was working as a team, and we kind of thought what LA is, and it's I could go on and on. It's the size of Holland and 2 Austrias, and it uses up one driving day of 6,000 cars around the world, and it's an energy footprint the size of Peru, and we could go on and on. And I'm looking at broader macro issues, and out of that came the LA Now studies, and then we went to Madrid and studied new towns, and then just recently I put out a book called Combinatory Urbanism, which is 12 projects that I've been working on. And out of that came a method of looking at city making, and what I'm interested in is the alignment of architecture and planning, the quantitative, analytical, demographic, extruded planning, the intuitive, qualitative notion of architecture, and I'm interested in going back to policy, or the notion that started with our thinking at San Francisco, where the work at that point, I think I said it, but at that point, everything we did, we discussed in some strategic way, kind of how does it affect, right, a client within broader kind of terms, and we're moving away from the aesthetic as a singular kind of idea. And by the way, I think that would be essential today for students. I don't think any student should be working within aesthetic terms, maybe after the first or second year. The one has to understand projects within broader tactical terms. And because we live in a different world, and it's going to be just a necessity. And I think it also primes them for the complexity that's necessary to deal with architecture in today's world. And now we're producing these projects. We won the 2012 Olympics, which of course New York didn't get. And we're now able to find ways of analyzing and articulating complex problems and operating on multiple scales and operating with huge amounts of information and basically looking at the results or the possibilities inherent in particular strategies. It's not a particular strategy, but able to quantify that in terms of its spatial, qualitative understanding. And then with that comes architectural devices that are not going to be part of a planning operation. You're going to be using, in this case, landforming, which we just talked about, right? And it started to completely change kind of how we work. And then again, it has certain architectural implications, but it's not about the architecture finally. And then again, in a very different way with the World Trade Center, it became more of a critique of the problem, and we were challenging the building of a singular tower as a unilateral versus maybe multilateral kind of notion of representing this country in terms of the status of this country. And it seemed to be kind of a limited idea, and we went back and looked at it and laid the towers on the ground, put the same program on it, actually upped the program, and made it into a cultural, social, kind of interactive place between Wall Street and the West Side Battery Park. And then last of all, the way I would do it with students, a work in progress. So something that represents kind of the status of what we're doing at this moment. And we're working on we're pretty far along on a building which is going to be, again, very much about an augmented landscape and a building and the relationship of those two. And it's the Science Museum, Science and Nature Museum in Dallas. And it represents kind of the latest of how we're working. And again, the skin, I could go into every piece of it, is going to have all the same components, and that more and more we're working simultaneously with design, construction, program, et cetera. And it's that simultaneity which is so unique and such an incredible possibility today. With that, I end. Thank you. The discussion of an awareness of hiring people from other cultures. And I'm going to say right away that there's a couple answers. One is certain characteristics that come out of that culture, and some are very radically different educational means. And so up until very recently, most Europeans are embedded in construction, and it's part of their exam work, et cetera. And it's a technical model. It's a polytechnic model, right? And certainly in Spain, in Germany, again, I've followed those people for years. There's also cultural differences. Pavel Getov was the guy that ran this building, worked for me for 7 years. Pavel came out of both communist and post-communist Bulgaria. He's just a tough guy. And he knows how to negotiate in a very complex world and get through the maze. And when you're on this site and you're going to have some burly guy at you, coming at you, and building is kind of crazy. I mean, they get in fights. I mean, I've seen they hit each other, right? And it gets really rough. And you have to have someone that can play that game, and that is not the American student. Way too pampered. Not into that at all. Not counting maybe some A-type guys. And it's just a different characteristic. But the other one is a skill. He also came with the more polytechnic model and was comfortable with construction. And I have to say, it's a conversation. Is Hernan here? Did he speak today? Yeah. Hernan and I have been going at this now for 8 years, and I'm very fond of Hernan, and we're friends. And I'm very critical. We're just been at it forever. And he gives me his best students quote. And I just went literally hours ago before I came, I was going through 4 portfolios. I have no idea at some level whether these people even be architects. The work is so abstract at some level that they might really want to be painters or something else, conceptualizers. And that I think there has to be some, it's going to be a scale thing, right? But there has to be some connection to even guide someone into the profession, and I think I lean way to the conceptual side. I'm going, well, I can look at the work and I'm interested in it, but it's immensely disciplined. So when I'm looking at his students, I see a discipline and a rigor that's just extreme, and that's what I'm looking at. But you're guessing whether that person is even interested in architecture or not, because a lot of it is really boring. They're working things out. Honestly, for another person, it would be a horrible thing to do. And you must all have that conversation, because this is a country that's propelled the conceptual, and there seems to be a very mimetic thing going on in the universities, and it seems like a lot of schools are copying or mimicking or whatever the conceptual model, and I think it's a horrible, horrible mistake. It really horrible. If you're, my son had a very serious operation, pediatric scoliosis, and there's 6 people in the room, and one's a surgeon, and one is a backup surgeon, also learning to be a surgeon, and the surgeon is a very, very well-known guy, right? It's a very, very complicated operation. And the anesthesiologist is trained in scoliosis, pediatric scoliosis, and we could go on and on. The 3 head nurses, right? Highly, highly trained people. You don't need more than one surgeon and one backup who's really there, part educational, part to get the guy a smoke or whatever when he wants to take 5 minutes off. And architecture, I think, is moving to a more specialized, and I've gone through that in my practice. Started all generalists, all young guys, all doing little buildings. And what would be another conversation I didn't talk about at all, that would be part of the urban, but it'd also be part of what we're doing now, starting with Farr Tower. We're starting with this building. As the work gets larger, it's going to keep getting larger. The global process is advanced, the economic aggregate is larger. And what used to be called megastructures and lineal cities when I was a kid in school, there were hypothetical projects, are literally everyday projects in China now. I just came from Chengdu, and we're working on a 15 million square foot project at one phase. I've got somebody looking at research right now, because I remember saying to my partner, I'll bet there hasn't been 15 million square foot downtown in LA for a decade. And I thought about it some more, 2 decades. I'll get you anything. There hasn't been 15 million square foot put in downtown LA. It could be longer. This is a common problem today. I think we need it's shifting the academy, that it requires, again, more integrative thinking, complexity, understanding the depths of problems that increase that scale, and it includes conceptual thinking, and that's why I'm interested in the giant project, because I'm interested in how does a single architect or a single office studio, under a very short period of time, develop the complexity and the richness of the cities we admire, all right? And so when I came back from Chengdu with this other client that I just met, he's explaining qualities, and we're all over the world. He's a well-traveled guy, and we're talking about parallels, and it's on a waterway, and we're discussing Hamburg and very particular notions of Hamburg and a typology of Hamburg on the water, which is completely opposite of Venice or something. We could go on and on. And, but he's interested in beginning the project with the nature of a direction that has to do with propelling a certain kind of complexity that comes from, not literally, well, both literally and not literally, from the historic city. And we need both the methods to do that, and we need students that are capable of working within both team frameworks and that can deal with those types of problems. And they're going to be the problem in the future. With that will come urban design, infrastructure, et cetera, and less it'll be architecture. I think architecture will be last, actually. Least interesting, least relevant. The compelling discussions today are going to be about cities, right? And we're just touching the collapse point. We haven't got there yet. We're close. Before it just doesn't work. We don't understand them. We have no understanding whatsoever of the city. Precinct level, 1 million people. The Best Pocket Park, mucking around at precinct level, for me, beyond boring. Not professional. Anybody can do that. You can find a neighborhood group that can do that. And they'll do it worse or better. I would prefer the neighborhood to do it half the time versus architects. I don't think there's any difference. It doesn't, I could honestly, I think there's very little difference. The real compelling problems are the macro problems of how we operate the metropolis, starting with the city, right? And we have no bloody clue how to do it. No bloody clue. And the schools, as far as I know, are, I think we could probably do a better job, or we could start looking at problems we don't understand. Kipnis uses the word unknowability, and I like the idea of working with unknowability, because that's exactly where we are. And to start understanding, to start grasping the complexity of our lack of knowledge, of understanding the nature of cities that are 20 million people. Again, I was in Shenzhen before I was in Chengdu. In 20 years, I went from a village to over, they don't know quite, it's over 20 million people, and it's amazing. A lot of you have probably been there. You look at building new, stop sign new, curb new, landscape new, everything's, it's LA that developed in what, 60 years, 50 years, from a city of 1 million. This is a village of under 5,000 people. It was not even, it's just literally a village that's built in 20 million, right? This region is 17.5 million people, right? And it's just startling, and it's a mess. And they recognize it, because I was just on a jury there, and they're asking me, what do we do? We're building these objects because they're fascinated with the icon, but they're not icons anymore. There's like 500 of them, right? And so the icon is the context. It's really fascinating. It's kind of reversed it all. So to build something that's actually unique, you'd have to build a non-icon. But the discussion was that they have to move, certainly in the dumbest sense, towards space making, relationship making, right? The cities are the collaborations of things. They're not buildings, right? And we build, cities are accretional, and they're done traditionally over a long period of time by many, many people with many, many different backgrounds over that history. And it's collaboration. And they're also so highly differentiated that you couldn't name a city that you admire that isn't somewhat differentiated. So you can pick your Paris that you choose, the aspect of Paris that happens to be interesting to you, or the 5 or 6 territories that are interesting, and you can move within vast organizational territories that have vastly different characteristics. And they recognize that already. And they also obviously recognize the performative energy movement, the automobile, et cetera. And seems like interesting projects that we should be, who else is going to do the research if it's not coming out of schools of architecture? Rand, there will be people that'll pick it up if we don't do it. You think, you agree? Is there an assessment of that architecture is moving towards broader urban projects? It seems that's the only way it can go. And then there'll be I saw Margaret shaking her head as I was talking about the precinct. It operates on multiple levels, as it should. There's people that operate at they have different interests. And that's exactly what should happen. And some of them are more realistic. John Kaliski, and I have that conversation continually. He's interested in realistic stuff. I have no interest at all whether this is a problem that'll be I'm contributing to 20 years from now, or I'm doing my best to, or I don't contribute to it, whatever I do. And there's stuff that just happens right away, and it's obvious. And by the way, we also obviously, as you know, we don't have a culture that's interested in macro conceptual problems. This is a small idea world that we're in at this moment. What was the article in New York Times? There was an article about lack of ideas, big ideas. It was really interesting. It was the Atlantic. Anybody read that in the Atlantic magazine? But this is not a time of ideas of any kind of scale, which is only obvious if you look at the political scene, right? We're incapable of even aligning in the simplest ways. And so that a lot of your students and your academies are preparing for the next era when it'll change, and it will change. We thought we were at the bottom, but we found a new bottom, and it'll come back up again. It has to, right? You can't keep politics at reality television forever, and but it will. I think there's no question that it has to deal with those types of problems, and they're going to be global. You're going to find them everywhere, right? You're going to be working like a huge amount of people today in China. I assume a lot of your students are in China right now. That's where they get jobs, right? That's where mine are. And then half my students are Chinese. So it's interesting. They're getting trained here. That's another, I'm going to end one more comment. The notion if you're from out of this country, you get educated here, best schools in the world, no question about it, and you leave. There's no opportunities here. You go home and practice. Wow, tough one, right? Huge disadvantage if you're local, right? And but they all understand that. I've taught my whole life, and I'm at Columbia, and I've got half my students from all over the world, and they know exactly what they're doing. They're going to come to grad school, polish up, work for 1 or 2 years in an office, and do some postgraduate stuff, right? And then home they go and build, right? Which also affects the academy. Am I right? It affects our own idea of what the academy is.
Well, I think we all like to share a drink with you across the street.